Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and I am here to review episode 2 of Genndy Tartakovsky's PRIMAL, entitled River of Snakes. And as second episodes go, this one does a very good job of progressing the story that was set up in episode 1. Just as a second episode should do, of course. Now again, I'm gonna get into spoilers. I think you should just expect that for the entirety of this particular run of reviews. I just can't really discuss what works about this show without getting into spoilers, so that's your final warning for the rest of this whole run. So this episode is basically about Spear and Fang learning how to work together and live together. Because even though they decided they would stick with each other at the end of episode 1 because they've got sort of a shared history and now they're both alone otherwise, that doesn't necessarily mean they're automatically going to function well together as a unit. In fact, I'll just get the meme started right now. This episode's alternate title could easily be Handling Domestic Disputes with Your Dinosaur Waifu. I regret nothing, good night! But joking aside, that is essentially what's going on. They've agreed to be partners, not in a romantic way of course, but they've agreed to be partners, but they're still not entirely sure how to be partners, and for the first half of the episode, things slowly build as we see that Spear basically doesn't get any food. That's the main source of the issue. As the two are hunting, Fang either gets the prey first, or if Spear makes the kill, she snatches it away from him. There's even a scene where Spear climbs a tree to get some fruit, only for Fang to start ramming her head against the tree to knock the fruit down and get some of that herself. That's how, I guess, kind of greedy you could say she is. I mean, I guess she's reverting back to her pre-maternal days when she was only looking out for herself. And this isn't the sort of thing you can just talk out because 1, Spear doesn't talk and neither does Fang, and 2, they are technically on different intelligence levels. Even if Fang is smart for a T-Rex, she's still ultimately an animal and thus is not going to reason on exactly the same level as Spear can. So there's no real point in speaking even if Spear could speak. But there is a little bit more to it. Before we reach the halfway point, we get somewhat of a flashback of Spear entertaining his children by making shadow puppets. It's a very sweet little scene, and a scene in which we finally get to see what Spear was like when he was content and happy and settled down. And it leads to this horrifying moment where the shadows suddenly become the horned beasts that eat his children. And after that happens and snaps him out of this happy memory, he just looks at Fang and glares at her. So clearly there is a part of his mind that still can't quite separate all dinosaurs. Even though he knows Fang isn't the one who killed his children, when he looks at her, he still has those memories of what happened. So, and of course, obviously he has post-traumatic stress disorder from the whole event. So, we're getting to see more layers of that. And the layers really come out during the fight scene, which, I have to say, the second half of this episode feels like Samurai Jack. Just in case you forgot who made this show, there are the extended periods of walking, the way the characters pose during fights, the way the fight itself is accented by lightning strikes. It feels very much like Samurai Jack, which I didn't notice in the first episode. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm just saying it was noticeable this time. And as I was saying, the fight itself also conveys a lot about the characters, because this is essentially a conflict between our two protagonists. Spear finally has enough and lashes out at Fang, and Fang naturally is going to defend herself. And it's interesting because it not only demonstrates that these two, somewhat inexplicably, are equally matched, but it also shows us how their relationship works even in conflict. Spear is at a disadvantage pretty much the whole time. Every weapon he uses to try and get the upper hand gets taken away from him. He's obviously smaller and not as durable compared to the dinosaur with the sharp teeth and claws. But every single time he loses an advantage, he figures out a way to either get to safety or find a new weapon. So he is smart. He has an ingenuity to him. He will keep going so long as he has the means to. As for Fang, it's clear that she could kill Spear. She has multiple opportunities to do so, and it would be easy for her. But even when she has the opportunity, even at a moment where she has him in her mouth, she doesn't kill him. So it's clear that she's not just a mindless killer. She does, on a certain level, care. So like I said, smarter than average, capable maybe of more emotion than you would expect from a dinosaur. I mean, we've already known that for certain, but this is what solidifies it. Speaking of Fang, she gets some of the best subtle animation in this episode. There are a lot of close-ups of her eyes, usually one at a time because of the shape of her head, but we get a lot of eye close-ups for her that really go a long way to showing us what she's thinking and feeling. I think one of the best ones is when the actual conflict between the two really starts, like when it starts in earnest. They both see a deer, Fang takes off after the deer, Spear decides at that point he's had enough, he gets in Fang's way, jumps right in front of her, has his spear point at the ready, and there's a close-up of Fang's eye where it's difficult to actually describe because you have to just see it to understand how it works. But it's like you see her pupil is clearly looking at Spear, and it flicks down to the point and then back up to him, almost like she's going, "What are you doing? What is that? I didn't think we were like that, pal. Why are you pointing that at me?" And it's a great moment. That's just one such moment. There are a lot of close-ups of her eyes at key points where you immediately can tell what she's thinking. Sometimes they're static, sometimes they show her eye widening or narrowing, sometimes it's the way the pupil's moving, but it's some great animation. It's not like the most incredible animation as far as movement, but it's in terms of how the movement is used that makes a difference. So I'm sure some of you are wondering by now, wait a minute, isn't this episode titled River of Snakes? Where are the snakes at? Well, they don't show up until the very end, and they are the thing that gets our two protagonists to stop fighting each other and get back on the same page. It's at this particular point where it's clear the fight is kind of at a stalemate, and then they suddenly become aware that just off in the tree line that's to the side of them, there are these gigantic serpents all in a mound, just sort of writhing around like a giant snake pit, but without a wall. And it's like there's this moment of, oh, how did we not see those? And then to make things worse, there's this tidal wave out of nowhere. I mean, I guess it was raining, but yeah, if there's one thing I'm going to criticize about this episode, it's that the geography during its final act doesn't really make much sense. You don't really understand how they couldn't have seen those giant snakes there, or where the downpour comes from. So, yeah, the show isn't completely perfect. It was made by flawed humans. But as I've said in the past, what matters more to people in fiction is usually pathos over logos, emotion over the logic and realism of it. And since this show is driven by the emotion, then you can ultimately overlook it. It still doesn't make sense, but you can overlook it because how it makes sense isn't really the point. The point is, both Spear and Fang are suddenly confronted by something that threatens both of them. And it's actually a good way to end their conflict. They've spent the entire episode up to that point as the two alphas. They are at the top of the food chain, with their only competition really being each other. And suddenly they are confronted by these forces, both giant snakes and unstoppable wall of water moving towards them, and that suddenly reminds them that they're not at the top. Like, it takes a literal act of God to get these two to stop fighting and remember that they need each other to survive. So, even though it's sudden, well, that's the way the natural world works sometimes, so it works in that regard. And then, of course, you have the rest of the finale take place mostly underwater as the two are struggling against these snakes as they're in this rushing water that's heading towards a waterfall now, because there was a cliff, and obviously gravity still works. And that's when they really need to start working together again. And what really drives it home is the fact that they both almost lose each other at different points. When they go over the edge, they almost find a way to stop by using a decapitated snake and looping it around a rock, but ultimately Fang is heavier than Spear. She falls first. And then Spear falls, and the catch is, even though Fang falls first, she misses all of the rocks that are waiting at the bottom and survives, whereas Spear hits every single rock on the way down, it seems. And he's not in good shape. So each one witnessed the other potentially dying, and that's what drives home to them, oh, we really shouldn't be fighting. If we're gonna be together, we've got to be together. So when we finally get to that last shot of them hunting again, but this time they're hunting as a unit, it's been properly earned. The episode has built up to that point the best way it possibly could. So yeah, that's episode 2 for you. Good story progression, good development for our two leads, good animation. Overall, a great step forward, and definitely exactly the way the series should be progressing. They should be able to keep this up. There are going to be 5 episodes total. Next episode is the halfway point with episode 3. Should be good. That's the one with the mammoth in it. We will see how that goes. They didn't really hint in the teaser at what the conflict will be for that one. If it will somehow still be between our two protagonists, or if it'll be something external. I'm guessing the next step is move on to the external things. But we will see. Either way, another great episode from another great series. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer, signing off. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it, as well as subscribe to the channel for more content of a similar nature. Also, check the description for links to our Twitter, DeviantArt, and Patreon pages, as well as the Amazon link for the novel Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, penned by yours truly. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.